Hi, welcome. Looks like folks got something to eat downstairs, and glad you brought it up. Glad you brought something with you. Thanks for coming for our noon program. It is a delight to have friend and colleague Katie Dillon with us from Align, Minneapolis. Align is a coalition of 17 congregations, mostly in the downtown core, but also a little bit further afield, that work together to address issues of homelessness. And so First Unitarian Society has been a member of this coalition since its founding some 15 years ago. And we are proud to be a part of it. And Katie has been with Align for about a year and a half, and she keeps us together. So I'm really excited to hear, Katie, what you're going to tell us about the state of things right now for people with lived experience of homelessness and what you are needing us to do. So, Katie Dillon, thank you. Welcome here.
Thanks. It's so great to be with you all. I love that this is part of my job, that I get to come out to different congregations and speak about the issue that, of course, is near and dear to my heart, but is important to you all as well. So I'm going to go through just a little bit of information today about our organization, and then, as Kelly mentioned, kind of talk about, the issue of homelessness, kind of how are things looking today, particularly in our city and our state, and what are the things that we can do. Certainly, with kind of a smaller group, I'd love to answer questions as they come. So if you think of questions, feel free to call them out. I'll repeat them into the mic so that the recording will capture them. But then we'll also have some time at the end for Q&A, because I always love to kind of hear what people are thinking as we get through the conversation. So a little bit of background, as Kelly mentioned, our organization started in 2008, and initially we were called the Downtown Congregations to End Homelessness. So there's a group that David is part of, the downtown clergy, and they were seeing such an incredible rise in homelessness and a lot of issues related to homelessness, and really wanted to have a way to answer the call to address it as a group of interfaith congregations. And so since that time, we have grown beyond just the downtown core. We have congregations across Minneapolis. And so I believe it was 2018, the group was renamed to Align Minneapolis to kind of capture the fact that it was beyond just the downtown core. You'll hear me talk about this periodically, but one of our core underlying foundational values as an organization is listening to the voices of people with lived experiences of homelessness. Many of us who do this work do not bring lived experiences of homelessness. Some of us do, but many of us don't. And so we know that we can't do this work without understanding what are people who are experiencing homelessness truly telling us, what are they experiencing, what are the issues that are top of mind to them, and how can we come up with solutions with the people that have the lived experience, really guiding us. And we also have what we kind of call a multi-pronged approach to addressing homelessness. So obviously, when somebody is experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, that is a very immediate issue. And we want to, as our network of congregations, be able to answer some of the immediate needs of the community. So we have congregations that provide direct services. This might look like providing meals or providing vouchers to get an ID when somebody needs an ID replacement, providing bus transportation if somebody got a new job, those types of things addressing immediate needs. But then we also want to be working for the systemic change to change the circumstances that are causing and keeping people in homelessness. So it's really a both and. And because we are so small in terms of our staff, it's me as a full-time staff, and then we have a half-time coordinator for one of our programs that I'll talk about a little later. We participate in coalitions, both at the local and state level, to really be able to kind of build kind of our network of power among our congregations, but also within these coalitions, so that we're kind of amplifying our voices. So overall about our organization, we have a steering committee, which beloved Kelly sits on to oversee the direction of the organization. We have a number of our congregations represented on that steering committee. So they're kind of like the board of directors. We have a congregational organizing team, which we have two folks here that are part of our congregational organizing team, Mary and Marcy. And we have, I believe it's 7 congregations represented right now. And this group is generally it's lay folks within our congregations who come together and talk about how can we get out into our congregations to educate folks about the issue, inspire folks, and then really get people to take action on the issue. That group also oversees our monthly newsletters and our seasonal campaign guides that we publish 3 times a year. And then we have another team called the Direct Service Providers team. So as I mentioned, some of our congregations do provide direct service. And so that group gets together once a month to make sure that, if there's services needed in the community, that those needs are being met among our group. There might be overlap of services, but we want to make sure that we're not doing too much duplication. That team also oversees our own program, which is our emergency rental assistance program that I'll get into a little later. And then we also have a choir that emerged out of that team. It's called the Street Song Choir. We meet weekly, and that group is made up of people who have a connection with homelessness, either lived experience of homelessness, or maybe they've been, volunteering and working in some of our direct service provider congregations. So I mentioned that one of our core foundational tenets is listening to the voices of people with lived experience. And one of the ways that we do this as an organization is we support a group called Street Voices of Change. The Street Voices of Change group, they started in 2016. And it is a group of people who have lived experiences of homelessness, some of whom may currently be homeless, but some may have previous experiences with homelessness. And they get together to work on issues that are important to them and work for change. So currently, the group meets twice a week. On Thursdays, they meet at Central Lutheran Church, and on Fridays, they meet at the Basilica of St. Mary. And they identify issues that are important to them by talking among, their group and with people that they're connected with to say, what's important to you? What's kind of driving you to be working for change? And so there's a few different topics that the group works on kind of, long term. One of the other things that the group really does is create community among themselves. And so we have a list of rules at Street Voices of Change that kind of guide the work together. And so I want to be very respectful of one of the rules, which is that we don't tell other people's stories without their permission. But I will say very generally, often what we hear from folks that are part of Street Voices of Change is that when they are experiencing homelessness, or maybe they're being perceived as experiencing homelessness, that there's this sort of invisibility that comes along with that. And folks may go through their day and, people might really not want to interact with them, or they might just sort of look past them. And so there's this feeling of kind of dehumanizing when folks are experiencing homelessness. And so when they come together as a group, it's a safe place where they can really connect with each other. And because they're building power together and organizing together, there's a way that it's almost like a rehumanization, right? And so that's actually a really important thing that group does among themselves and for one another. So because they have their expertise of lived experience of homelessness, there's oftentimes requests that come in for their expertise to be brought to other tables. So for example, Hennepin County, who runs a lot of services related to homelessness, shelter, things like that, will often come to the Street Voices of Change group. They might even recruit members of Street Voices of Change to sit on their committees because they also know, right, that lived experience is so important to have at the table when they're shaping programs and services. One of the big accomplishments that we like to share about Street Voices of Change is that a number of years ago, they were having a lot of concern around the experience that people were having in the shelter system in Minneapolis. So folks were, very unhappy with sort of the state of some of the shelter buildings and, how they were treated within those spaces. And so the Street Voices of Change group created what they call the Shelter Residents Bill of Rights. And this really outlines the expectation for safe and humane access to shelter. And they took that Shelter Residence Bill of Rights to the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners and actually got that implemented within the Hennepin County shelter system in Minneapolis. So most of the shelters in Minneapolis have a contract through Hennepin County, not all, but most. And so any shelter that has a contract with Hennepin County now has to abide by the Shelter Residence Bill of Rights. And so it was a really huge win for people within the community to know that there's an expectation of safe and humane and dignified shelter. And there's a process as well for, formally lodging a complaint and things like that. So from that, the group then brought that to the state level. And the state implemented something called the Shelter Task Force about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now. And that group then looked at what could standards look like statewide for shelter, for safe and dignified shelter statewide. That group, they finished their work in December of just this past December, and they presented a final report, and our hope is that that then becomes legislation to have standards implemented across the state. So really just an incredible example of the work that was done starting from this great group. And so I'm just going to share with you, these are a few of our Street Voices of Change members. And we asked them, we did a little exercise and asked them why they show up to do this work. And so I want to share with you their words. Michelle shared, she said, "The most important thing I want to stress about homelessness is every individual deserves a home and every story is different. It is our responsibility to help each other." Darrell in the middle, he said, "We are a community. We have to work together. Lack of affordable housing is an epidemic, and that's why homelessness is going up. We need to look out for each other as neighbors." And then Jerry, I love Jerry. He just always has the biggest smile, and I just love him. I love him dearly. He shares, "I feel that people look at homelessness as a statistic. We are not less than. We need a little help, and that gives us a little motivation. The system doesn't care. It just sees people as a number." And so, you can tell that the voices of these people are so powerful, and their experiences really inform the work that we do. We also have 2 members of Street Voices of Change that sit on our steering committee to make sure that as we go about our work as an organization, we really have those folks at the table. So I mentioned our emergency rental assistance program. This is the only program that we as an organization run ourselves, and it's really about homelessness prevention. So it's meant to keep people in their homes when they have experienced a crisis that has led them to get behind on their rent. So we will provide one-time direct monetary assistance to get them caught up on their rent so that they can be stable to move forward. We hear a lot of kind of similar theme stories, and I'm sure that, some folks who maybe have been in this space or know kind of about poverty in our city. When folks are living paycheck to paycheck, really on the margins, really low income, oftentimes even just a small emergency can set folks back. So, maybe somebody needs a car to get to work, but their car breaks down and they have an expensive repair. Or somebody had to care for a sick child or a sick family member, and they had to take time off of work and lost a couple of paychecks. Those types of things can really mean that their housing is then at risk. And so our program is meant to step in, like I said, one time to just sort of secure and stabilize so that somebody is able to move forward. We have seen a huge increase in need since June of 2022, and I will get into this a little more later, but that need, I think we were optimistic that the need that we saw getting so high in the summer was gonna wane a little bit, but unfortunately the need has just remained extremely high through the second half of 2022 and into 2023. So like I said, I'll get into that a little bit later. But I do want to share some really awesome statistics that we're really proud of about our program. We served 109 households in 2022, and we're a pretty small program, so 109 households is very impactful. That was 41 families that had minor children in the home and 68 households that were only adult households. And that looked like a little under $212,000 in total assistance and a little under $2,000 per household. So that number has remained fairly consistent, around 2,000 per household is what it looks like to be the difference between somebody possibly losing their housing and going into homelessness, or being able to stay stable.
I want to just insert something right here, and I'm coming up, so I'll get it on the recording.
Absolutely.
This program, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, was our bid and need at last year's auction, and we raised some $6,000 that night specifically for this program. So that's where our money went. So I just wanted to make that tie-in.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And truly, this is one of those instances where this work could not be done without the support of congregations, that extra support that we were, when we saw the increased need in the summer, a number of our congregations, including you all, stepped up and were providing some additional funding so that we could then provide additional assistance to folks who are needing to have a little help to stay in their homes. So really, really impactful. And also, we know that we are just a tiny drop in the bucket of the need, because folks have such a high percentage of their income that they're paying towards housing, because housing is so expensive right now. I'll get into that more later. All right, so why are we seeing some of the things like what I was just talking about with the increase in need? So 2022, as a lot of you know, was a really volatile year. Folks that were really kind of on the margins and, had limited income, they had some extra supports during the pandemic that basically dropped off as 2022 kind of went on. So the child tax credit that people had been getting in advance up until 2022 or during 2021, that ended. The direct monthly payments ended at the beginning of 2022. So folks who had children in the home, who had been having a little extra support, and the child poverty rate was cut significantly, that ended. Rent Help MN, which was the state emergency rental assistance program that was funded with pandemic funds, that they stopped accepting applications at the end of January. It was a fairly abrupt end to the program, because they were seeing that there was this huge increase in need, and they realized they were going to run out of money very quickly. So they stopped accepting applications, and they ran through the remainder of their funding. Yeah.
So I know the child tax credit was supposed to end, but didn't it get included in one of the bills that was just passed?
So a bill that was just passed maybe at the state or federally? I don't know the answer to that. So the question was, did the child tax credit end up getting renewed? It may be that it was renewed for like when people file their taxes, they can still get that. But as far as I know, the direct monthly payments did not restart, unless I totally missed something.
Huge bill that Biden tried to pass and didn't get passed.
Okay.
Now we're bringing it up and passing it, but I might be wrong, but
Okay.
I don't think it does.
Yeah.
I think there would be a big deal about it.
Yeah, I think it might have been in there and it got cut.
Yeah. And so I think, that too is the difference, like whether it's a monthly, ongoing payment versus just when somebody files their taxes. So yeah, I mean, that's federally, there's definitely a lot of opportunity. So in June, what had been an eviction moratorium in Minnesota ended. And when the eviction moratorium ended, what we saw then was a huge spike in eviction filings by landlords for non-payment of rent. So filing in court, the courts got really backed up. They're starting to get caught up now, but basically, we were seeing that once that moratorium ended, the filings really, really spiked. And so that coincided with the time that we were starting to see a huge increase in need in our emergency rental assistance program. What we've also seen in Minneapolis, those of you who may live here or, because you come here on Sunday mornings, you may be aware of some of the issues around encampments in the city. So we have seen a lot of forced encampment closures across the city. We do, as a line, have a statement about our neighbors living in encampments. And, of course, I encourage you to read that. It gives a little background about encampments, and it gives a little bit of kind of where we stand as an organization. and, arguments can be made about encampments, certainly, but kind of the bottom line as an organization that we kind of continually say is that forced encampment closures do not end homelessness, and in fact can have really negative consequences for people who have been residing in encampments. And so it's not a solution, right? So while homelessness is rising, encampments continue, encampments sometimes grow. If an encampment is closed in one place, oftentimes then there's a new one that will be created. And so it doesn't really solve the issue. We also saw, of course, rising costs kind of across the board. A lot of folks who are, have very limited incomes were feeling the pressure of rising costs, food and gas and things like that. And we also saw increased rents. The increase in rents were not quite as magnified as they had been in years past. And in fact, there are some signs that they're starting to normalize a little bit in Minneapolis. But the fact is, we know that many households are cost burdened when it comes to paying rent, meaning they pay too much of their income to rent, based on what it would be to be affordable. We also have seen that as the eviction moratorium ended, our shelters started getting more and more close to full. And in fact, our family shelter in Hennepin County, the biggest one that we have, is over capacity right now. And they, when they get over capacity, because Hennepin County has a shelter all policy for families, they will put people up in hotels. But I believe at one point they were close to 200% of capacity. It's leveled off a little bit recently. But it was very much directly correlated to the end of the eviction moratorium. Families were forced into homelessness. They started accessing services through Hennepin County Family Shelter, and so that shelter became full and at overflow. And single adults as well, that number is increasing, and shelter space is often at capacity, but it was not as extreme as families. Unfortunately, we also had some gridlock at the state capitol in the 2022 session. There was a lot of work that was done, and in the end, nothing basically got passed. Tons of things that were really important to us as an organization were included in the final omnibus bill, but it was left without being passed. So unfortunately, that just means that, things that we were hoping to have, be moving down the road were sort of paused. For example, there was an affordable housing project that had been in the works, and because there was no bonding from the state during the 2022 session, that project had to get put on hold. So that's just an example of that. And just, I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but housing costs, of course, are something that we see, and part of the reason for that is that there are not enough housing units overall, and there are especially not enough housing units for people that are at the 50% and below the area median income, so lower income folks. I believe we actually just had a presentation from David Hewitt at Hennepin County, and I think his statistic, I want to say it was around 60,000 more units are needed in Minneapolis to be affordable at the lowest income bracket, and so we definitely know that there's not enough units. Okay, so what do we do? This is the question that we always get, right? We know that the situation is very serious. We know that that there's a lot that is not going right. How can we, as people of faith, as people who are moved to, make a difference in the world? What do we do? One of the things that I think is really, really important is connecting and building relationships with our unhoused and housing insecure neighbors. So I mentioned how some folks experiencing homelessness feel like they might be invisible, or feel like, people don't interact with them kind of in a human-to-human way. And so one of the very basic things that we can do is treat people as humans, connect with folks, say hi, say hello. We often, folks will often ask, oh, well, if I see somebody, signing by the side of the road, requesting money, what do I do? My first answer always is connect with that person, maybe with some eye contact, maybe give them a smile, let them know you see them, because they may have a dozen cars go by and they may not feel seen, they may not feel human. So number one, connect with them, let them know you see them as human. Whether you give them money or you don't, that's a personal decision, but always know that that's a human being who is fully, deserving of love and care, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, some folks really will, kind of put themselves out there in a way that's like, I want you to pay attention. Yeah, certainly.
Even, they're not, they'll do something if you don't give them any money, but they make your connection.
Sure, yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like as humans, we want to make a connection. And then it can go deeper. If you are involved in any type of volunteering work, or if you're involved in any type of, work around the city, and you happen to, be interacting with somebody who might be experiencing homelessness or housing instability, it's really, again, about building those relationships, having a conversation. It's not about asking prying questions, but really just, hey, how's it going? Or, just kind of connecting on that person-to-person level. Another big thing we like to talk about is working together. It sounded like that was really a theme that I was hearing in assembly this morning, was that kind of community togetherness. And so, of course, as Align Minneapolis and, being an interfaith coalition, that's our big thing, right? No one single person is going to be able, okay, Jeff Bezos probably could solve homelessness, but like other than him, no one person probably can solve the entire issue of homelessness. And so really it's about coming together as a community, being stronger together. And then I also like to talk about how you can really be a pebble in the pond. And so if you had a little nugget of information that you learned today, or something that was really moving from, an experience you had or something you learned, maybe that's then sharing it with your friends or, with your community, or, just talking about the issue and raising awareness. Or, you as a congregation can be working on, some of the organizing activities that that our organizing team puts together. And so it's kind of about, yes, you're just one single person, but you can always make an impact as you're kind of in the broader community. Yeah, Mary?
I'm just beginning to make this connection because it confounded me. Like, why aren't there any housing? Why isn't there housing? What happened? Because they're building housing everywhere.
Sure.
And I think, and I'm sure you understand this, and people who are in the field understand this, but I'm not sure if the average person understands it. Is that in the past, there was lower income housing that was totally standard. It wasn't substandard. It was just people who have lower wage jobs would gravitate towards lower rent housing, but it was still okay housing.
Sure.
And I think that particular housing stock has either been gentrified or gone away. I mean, it's just not available in the natural course of things, like in the past. People had different incomes, they lived in different things, I mean, it wasn't all quite as perfect as that, but that no longer works. And I think that's hard for the average citizen to understand that kind of thing of, well, you just, you don't get a fancy house. You get a place that's a little less,
Right, more basic, yeah.
Everyone's stuff isn't viable anymore.
Right. Yeah, so Mary's, if I can just paraphrase a little bit, so the housing stock in general, there has been less and less housing stock that is just at a basic level affordable for people who are at a more modest income. And there are a variety of reasons for that. Some of what we would consider to be naturally occurring affordable housing has been bought up by, for example, there was the Crossroads at Penn, and that was bought by an out-of-state company, and it was redone, and now it's being leased out at a much higher rent rate, and the people that were there were displaced, many of whom had either they might have had an affordable housing voucher, or they just had more modest incomes and they were able to afford that. So we do see developers or companies coming in and kind of taking away something that had been affordable housing and moving it into a different bracket. We also know that building new affordable housing is quite expensive. Just building housing in general can be quite expensive. And so in order for developers to be able to build new affordable housing units, they need a mixture of sources of assistance, including, for example, there's an affordable housing trust fund in the city of Minneapolis. They can take some of those dollars. There's the housing infrastructure bonds from the state. They can take those dollars. But they need a lot of those things to come in in order to be able to actually make it even a viable project. And there are a lot of housing units being built in Minneapolis, or have been over the last number of years, but those are much more of like a higher rental rate and not as much of the, just affordable.
I think it's some of the little houses out in Bloomington. Downport, whatever. They used to be lower income houses. They're not.
Right. Yeah. And so anytime that there's so Minneapolis as kind of a market has had a housing crunch where there's not enough housing. And so then what ends up happening is the rates or the cost then rises. And so, if your income isn't rising to meet that, then that can be that's when it becomes unaffordable, and you can become literally homeless because you can't afford your rent. Yeah.
What about the new walls budget?
Yeah, so I don't have a ton of detail about the entire WALS budget, but we will get a little bit into the legislative stuff. But we know that the governor, kind of generally speaking, understands that there's a lot of need for investment across the housing continuum. And that looks like a lot of different things. I'll get into it. But we do know that the governor is very aware of it and has, again, I don't know in all the detail of the budget, but has included some stuff in his budget that would be trying to answer some of the need. We also know that because of the last handful of years where there's been underinvestment, we're going to need a lot to kind of get caught up, if that makes sense. All right, so investment. I've used that word already. I'm going to keep using it. So what we need as a state, as a city, as a county is investment across the continuum. So the continuum looks like investing in homelessness prevention. We want the state to be funding more rental assistance. We're a tiny little program. We can't address all the need, but we would love for there to be federally funded, state-funded prevention assistance to keep people in their homes so they do not become homeless in the first place. We want investment in safe, dignified shelter so that when people do experience homelessness and need to access shelter, they're not kind of then going in a spiral of being dehumanized and feeling othered and things like that, that they can be in a place where they feel cared for and lifted up, and that they can then move on to the next phase. We know that housing case management works. The Hennepin County has created actually 2 different teams over the last year and a half that is around case management. And really focused case management about housing, and it works. They've been able to house people that have been homeless for years, many of whom we know through our organization, and have had really, really a tough time finding housing. And working with housing case managers has then enabled them to get a voucher to make sure that their rent is affordable, and then be able to get into a space, an apartment that is willing to rent to them. There might be folks who have something on their background that makes it difficult for them to find a place.
I'm just wondering, is that a relatively new concept?
Housing case management is not necessarily a new concept. The challenge that we see with housing case management is there's not a lot of investment in it. So as an example, many of the housing case management teams that work in community-based organizations like what used to be St. Stephen's but is now Agate, Simpson Housing Services, their funding for case management, they have to raise most of those dollars themselves. They don't get dollars for case management from their state contracts. And so that can actually be a real barrier to organizations continuing to fund housing case management. So the fact that the county invested in housing case management is actually, it was a huge step, and a lot of it had to do with their work with Street Voices of Change, because Street Voices of Change was saying, look, we end up staying in shelter, there's not enough case managers to really help us get out of shelter. That's what we need. And so the county said, all right, we're going to step up, which was great, and they're seeing a lot of success with it.
So do you have the idea in the metro area what proportion of homeless folks are in that, if you will, housing case?
That's a good question. So the question was, what percentage of folks experiencing homelessness are part of, have access to case management right now? I don't know percentage-wise. It's a small percentage, I would say, at this point, but I think it's growing. There's the newest team from Hennepin County. They are working directly with people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, so doing outreach within encampments and people who are staying at places, maybe they're staying in their car, maybe they're staying at a transit station. So doing that direct outreach, and so trying to connect with more people directly related to housing case management. The numbers, though, I don't know those. I don't know those numbers. So we know we need more investment there. And then, of course, because of all the things that we've talked about in terms of not enough units and not enough affordable units, we need to build more housing. So we need investment to build more housing units. We need to protect the naturally occurring affordable housing that we already have. And we especially need units that are affordable for folks who are at modest, to lower incomes. So we usually use a metric of area median income. Whatever that is, 50% or lower is kind of where we know we need to target affordable units. So with that, I will just mention a couple of things before we get into more question and answers. So I have a few copies of this, but this is also available on our website. This is our legislative priorities for Align for this current legislative session. We're already seeing a lot of movement within the legislative session. Yeah, Kelly.
That is linked in the Friday email, and it will be for the whole legislative season.
Great. Yes, awesome. So linked in the Friday email. I invite you to read through this. This is really just basic information about our top 3 priorities that we have as an organization. We also support the Homes for All agenda, which is a statewide coalition, and they have kind of a top 10 priority. We endorse that. We were a part of that process, and we definitely fully support it. But we wanted to even get more kind of prioritized and more focused. And so you'll notice that actually, these top 2 issues are something that are really, really important to our Sweet Voices of Change group. That's one of the reasons that we prioritize them. So the first one being housing support affordability, which is a program for folks who have experienced homelessness, who have a diagnosed disability, which right now is often unaffordable for the residents. And so that is a big issue. Statewide shelter standards, which I mentioned was kind of born out of the Shelter Residents Bill of Rights in Hennepin County. That's one of our top priorities. And then investment in building more units and protecting the units that we have is another huge priority. And I'm just going to close out of this for a brief moment. So if you go to our website, we have a landing page, alignmpls.org/legislative advocacy. That's probably what was linked in your all's Friday email. So this has the same information, and this flyer is actually in here as well. So you can see that the information is in here, and that what we're hoping to do then as well is that we're going to update as bills are introduced and as they move through committees. We're hoping to have kind of timely updates here on our website. And if you want to become an advocacy ally, which is when we send out kind of periodically, we'll send out an email to our advocacy ally email list, and that's really asking folks to write to their legislators about an important topic. So, maybe let's say, for example, the statewide shelter standards were introduced, then we'd maybe ask folks, will you write to your legislator and say, this is important to me, this is why, I'm part of a congregation that's part of Align Minneapolis, et cetera. And so if you want to sign up for that, you can also do that on our website under Take Action, Become an Align Ally. So that is kind of it from me directly. I'm going to pull back up my
Lobby day.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Kelly. Lobby Day. So on March 8th, we're going to have our Homeless Day on the Hill. So that is a statewide event where folks will come to the Capitol and be talking with their legislators about these important topics. And so we invite anyone who's interested to sign up. There's a registration. It's through the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless. I know Kelly probably will link to that as well. And if you're interested in coming on the bus, we're going to have a bus that's going to take us from Central Lutheran down to the Capitol, or else, folks can get there on their own. And so it'll be a day when we kind of come together from across the state. It's a really cool event. We've been remote the last couple of years, so it'll be great to be back in person again at the Capitol.